In the global standoff increasingly described as the new Cold War of the 21st century, a quiet but decisive shift is taking place. Those who until recently insisted that the United States still held all the cards are now beginning to admit the initiative is slowly but steadily moving toward China. The symbol of this turning point came with news that at first seemed unbelievable. One of America's most loyal allies, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, is preparing to sell oil not only for dollars, but also for yuan. The report first appeared cautiously in the South China Morning Post, then was echoed by Bloomberg citing financial sources in the Gulf, and later confirmed by the Financial Times, which referenced anonymous negotiators within OPEC structures. Riyadh has so far refrained from official statements, but insiders claim the decision is essentially made. This is not just a diplomatic gesture. It strikes at the very foundation of American influence in the region and across the world. To grasp the scale of this, one must recall the role oil plays in the global economy. It is not just fuel for cars or raw material for factories. It is the backbone of modern civilization. Electricity, transportation, plastics, fertilizers, pharmaceuticals, all are linked in one way or another to hydrocarbons. Since the 1970s, when the US struck its famous petrodollar deal with Saudi Arabia, the dollar became the sole currency in which Saudi oil was sold. This arrangement secured the American currency's status as the world's reserve. Any country buying oil was compelled to hold dollars. It was Washington's main instrument of global power. But if Riyadh begins accepting yuan, that entire structure begins to crack. President Donald Trump has already responded in his trademark style. On Truth Social, he wrote, "America will not tolerate betrayal. Any country that turns against the dollar will pay a price." According to Reuters, the White House is discussing possible tariffs on Saudi steel and aluminum, as well as restrictions on arms sales to the kingdom. Yet experts note, Saudi Arabia cannot be intimidated by tariffs. First, it is the world's largest oil exporter, and in the midst of an energy crisis, its resources are too valuable to jeopardize. Second, Riyadh has its own levers of pressure on Washington, from cutting production to reducing purchases of American weapons. US officials understand this, but they are unable to stop the process. Meanwhile, China is moving methodically. Over the past 2 years, Beijing has ramped up investments in Saudi infrastructure, built petrochemical plants, and offered credit lines in yuan. During a visit to Riyadh last March, President Xi Jinping stated plainly, "Energy is the heart of our strategic partnership." At the time, those words sounded like diplomatic courtesy. Today, it is clear they were part of a strategy. According to Al Jazeera, delegations from China and Saudi Arabia have already held more than 10 rounds of closed-door negotiations on shifting oil contracts into yuan. And now, sources within OPEC say the first such deals could be signed as early as next quarter. For the United States, this means one thing: its greatest advantage, the petrodollar, is under threat. If even a portion of oil trade moves into yuan, global demand for the dollar will begin to decline. Central banks will diversify reserves, and reliance on the American currency will shrink. This will increase China's influence, as its currency, until now largely seen as regional, gains new standing. The Financial Times recently wrote, "For the first time in half a century, the dollar risks losing its absolute monopoly over the global energy market." In response, Trump has reverted to familiar tactics, threats and pressure. But as analysts at the Brookings Institution note, unlike Canada or Mexico, Saudi Arabia is not just a neighbor or a partner. It is the cornerstone of all US policy in the Middle East. Losing Riyadh as a reliable ally could set off a chain reaction. Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar are all watching the situation closely. If they see that Saudi Arabia can switch to the yuan without consequences, they may follow its lead. In that case, for the first time, the dollar would face a real alternative in the energy sector. Particular attention is on the Saudis themselves. In recent months, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has been asserting growing independence. He meets with Chinese leaders, expands cooperation with Russia, and takes part in BRICS summits. As The Economist notes, the Crown Prince sees China not merely as an economic partner, but as a counterbalance to American pressure. In this context, shifting to the yuan looks like a natural extension of his multipolarity policy. But why is this so dangerous for the United States? Because oil is the lifeblood of the global economy. The world consumes around 100 million barrels every day. If even 20 to 30% of that volume begins to be sold in yuan, it will reshape the entire financial architecture. The dollar will lose its exclusivity. That would strip the US of its ability to print unlimited amounts of money and finance its deficits at the expense of the rest of the world. This is what is known as the petrodollar privilege, and it is that privilege now under threat. Insiders claim panic is spreading within the Trump administration. One official, speaking anonymously to the Washington Post, said, "For the first time, we see our closest ally playing against us in a critical sphere. This is not just a challenge, it is betrayal." In Congress, voices are already calling for a full rethink of America's Middle East strategy, but time is running short. China is outmaneuvering the US step by step. The irony is that Trump's own trade war policies accelerated this process. By antagonizing allies and slapping tariffs on Canada, Europe, and Japan, he showed that America was no longer a guarantor of stability, but a source of risk. Faced with this, many countries began seeking alternatives. China offered one. And now oil, the planet's most vital commodity, has become Beijing's trump card. In the coming months, according to Nikkei Asia, the first major contracts are expected to be signed between Saudi Aramco and Chinese petrochemical corporations, with settlements conducted in yuan. If that happens, the world will stand on the threshold of a new era. Thus, the US has taken yet another serious blow. Trump again threatens tariffs, but Saudi Arabia cannot be intimidated that way. Riyadh's countermeasures could not only undermine American influence, but also clear the path for China to emerge as the new leader of energy diplomacy. And while it was once said that the future of the global economy depended on the dollar, more and more experts now insist the future may depend on the yuan. This is a moment when history is changing before our eyes. All of this is part of a single process: gradual de-dollarization. Among experts, the phrase, "the era of the yuan," is being used more and more often. The Guardian recently wrote that if even 10% of global energy trade shifts into yuan, it will trigger a domino effect. Oil would be followed by gas, coal, and rare earth metals. This would give China enormous leverage over world markets. Another point is crucial. America's role as guarantor of security in the Middle East is eroding rapidly. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, all those wars undermine trust in Washington. Saudi Arabia now sees that the US is no longer willing to pay the price of leadership. China, in contrast, offers investments, technology, and infrastructure without ideological pressure. It is no coincidence that, as Le Monde notes, Riyadh increasingly refers to China as its new strategic partner. What we are witnessing, then, is a historic turning point. The US is clinging to the past with threats and tariffs. China is building the future by setting new rules of the game. And now oil, that black blood of civilization, is becoming Beijing's weapon. If this trend continues, in just a few years, analysts may no longer be talking about the petrodollar, but about the petro-yuan. At that point, history would come full circle. Just as America gained global dominance through oil in the 1970s, China could cement its own dominance in the 2030s.